Hey guys, hey, it's Matthew. Welcome back to a web design class with me. This is Web Design 2, and this is the first project, Project 0, that you're going to be doing for me. It's basically just information that you're already familiar with, or you should be familiar with at this point. But let me bring up that PDF so that we can take a look really quickly and just review some requirements. 1 second. So basics refresher, creating a simple CV resume web page, which was in Web Design 1, we did this quite a bit, except we did it in a very cumulative way where we were building up a CV or a resume over time. And create a simple project folder with an index.html document and a styles.css document. And of course, you need those two documents within your project folder because the HTML is going to be the structural aspect and the styles.css is going to be the aesthetic aspect. And you can add those aesthetics as you see fit. A title, an H1 and H2, H3, all of these items I'd like to see on your new CV or resume. If you haven't taken a web design class in quite a while, I did give you the basic bare bones structure for a website, so you can kind of see there's the opening tag for HTML and the closing tag. There's also the opening tag for the head portion of the document and the closing tag. And in fact, that's a mistake. This should be indented over. That closing tag should be indented over, so it's right above the body. So anyway, all of the information within the head portion of the HTML document is sort of invisible in a sense, although there is this really important line of code, which is essentially the path so that the HTML document can find the styles.css document. I've gone ahead and I've given you an example that you can just download and use to go ahead and get started. I do that often, and I think it's perfectly acceptable in web design. We're not reinventing the wheel here. You'll hear me say that constantly. So cut and paste things to save time. We're not reinventing the wheel here. HTML is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's practically like air, especially with everyone on the internet these days. So yeah, cutting and pasting and using I guess the HTML moves that have worked for you previously, that's perfectly acceptable. That's just the way it works. So yeah, I've given you essentially a starter file for you to run with. The title portion of the document is really important because that lets folks know what page they're on, but it also is good for SEO. So for example, SEO spiders would be crawling all of this text to look for keywords. The visible part of an HTML document, of course, is within the body, and that's where you're going to be building your CV or resume. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So there is that example that I was talking to you about, which I have given you a copy of. It should be on Blackboard. If it's not, go ahead and send me an email. But I'm gonna put this on my desktop. Okay. See, there it is. I have a lot of stuff on my desktop, so it got lost. So here's the sample, and the first thing I might do is rename this Project 0. And then after renaming this parent folder, I would go ahead and open up my index and my styles with my preferred HTML editor. And I'm using brackets. I think brackets has been deprecated, unfortunately. But there's a redirect that is pointing to basically the same thing. But you should never pay for an HTML editor. There are plenty of good options out there that are completely free and do the job. Dreamweaver to me is overkill, and I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to me. If you are going to use Dreamweaver, I'm not going to hold it against you. But the beauty of HTML is its simplicity. So why complicate things with Dreamweaver? That's kind of how I see it. So here we have our two files that we're going to be working with. It's really important that you have these guys open to view and see as of course, when you're working. But you got to make sure you're using the right ones too, because you're naming multiple different projects, or there are multiple projects with the same index.html living within that folder. So you got to make sure that you've opened the right one and that you're editing and saving the right one, because things can get confusing really, really fast. So even, for example, you can see there's another styles and an index up here, but that was for another project I was working on with another student, and it's happening up here as well. So it's really easy to get these things confused, and you'll end up doing a bunch of editing on a document, and you'll be wondering why you're not seeing the changes or why things aren't working, and you'll have a slight anxiety attack, which might be, I guess, blowing things out of proportion, but it happens when you're working with HTML. So here I'm calling out the doc type so that the browser knows that it is indeed an HTML file. And then I have the opening, and then I have the closing, similar to what we were talking about on the PDF that I gave you. And I'm just going to call this my resume. I'm not going to do anything fancy because, again, this is just sort of a brush up tutorial thing. And the style sheet is, the path is there. And we don't need to do anything fancy because literally the styles document is living right next door to the index.html. So that works just fine. Let's go ahead and just go back to the PDF really briefly and look at some of the requirements. So I am advising that you create some divs. And so what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go into an old document, and I'm going to grab a couple of these divs. Again, we're not reinventing the wheel. I've already typed out the code again. Why should I do it again? But essentially, I want to have a couple divs where I can place some content. The first one, I want it to be the main div. And then the other one, I want it to be the resume content. Okay. And let's go back here again. I'm going to grab this code. That I was already working with. Where did it go? There it is, div main. I'm going to bring this back here, go to my style sheet, plug that in. But this one happens to be an ID, but I prefer class selectors. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Okay, so we got that. I'm going to just duplicate that. And then I'm going to call that, what was it, resume, I think. And essentially all I'm doing is creating a box right now. I don't need this margin 0 auto on resume because this resume div is actually going to live within that div, if that makes sense. So let's go back and readjust our code just a little bit because this guy needs to be nested within that guy. And I'm going to indent this over so I can kind of start seeing the structural relationship. This is no longer necessary for the time being, but actually I am going to use it. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. And then all of my content will start going within this resume portion of the div. Now let me double check my work. So main resume, okay, main resume, and I want to make sure I'm using div class. Yes, yes, just double checking my work really quickly. And giving also these divs a background colors. So I need to double check my dimensions. And you can use these hexes, but just for the sake of this exercise, I'm just going to, you can type in colors as well sometimes, and occasionally they'll pop up. You just saw that cyan popped up. So of course, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, CMYK, K for key, or which can also be understood as black. So anyway, you can just type in colors as well. And so I'm going to make this one yellow. Okay. I want this div width to simply be 1024, and I want the height to be 100%. I am not going to have any padding on my main div, which is basically like my grandfather div is the metaphor you may have heard me use in past, because there are family relationships with these divs. And see, this, I almost made an error there. Of course, you know, I like to drop these down to the next line so that I can see. I don't need that either. So I'm going to save. The resume has yet a background color of yellow. It's still 1024. The height is 100%. But in fact, I want to, let's see. I'm just going to keep it 1024. No, I'm not. Sorry, guys. So I need padding on the top and the bottom. Let's go padding. Let's just go padding general, 4 pixels. And it can't be 1024 now, right? So now it needs to be, if I'm not mistaken, 1016. Oops. And now let's just go double check our work really quickly. So let me save this. I'm already assigning some colors and some styles to the body and so forth. Actually, this, we don't want to do that. I'm going to get rid of this for now. And I'll assign some styles to the body here in a bit, but I think that's good for now. Now let's go back to our file folder. Whoops. I only want to select the index, and I'm going to open that in Google Chrome. Let's see how it looks. Okay, so you can see it's starting to work a little bit. The reason why it's 1024 wide, because we've told the div to be 1024 wide, but there isn't a whole lot of height to this document right now because the content is determining the height of the div, which is visible with the yellow. And since there's only this one line of text that we've created so far, that's why the div is kind of small. And by the way, that's sort of a trick, of course, is that you assign the div a temporary color so that you can actually see it. If you don't, you know, sometimes you can't see how the div is being rendered on the page unless you give it a background color. So that's just a little, that's a free tip for you. Give your div a background color so that you can see what's going on. The next step would be that you're essentially within this area, so within the body portion of the document, and we've created a div called main, right? And then I'm going to go back to the styles and we're going to review the commands that we've given. This margin 0 auto is going to center that div right smack in the middle, which is pretty handy. And then you can't actually see that div right now. You want to know why? Because it's supposed to be cyan, but you can't see that div because the resume div is actually nested within that div, and it's more or less the same size. You know, it's pretty much identical, and that's why you're not able to see that right now. This text is red because we've given a CSS command right here to give that paragraph text the color red, and H1s would be blue. So if I go back and if I create an H1 just really quickly, save it, and just to satisfy my OCD, I'm going to drop that down. I'm going to come back, hit Command R for refresh. So look, there's our header, and it is indeed blue. So this is kind of reviewing how we can use the style sheet and the index.html document to start start writing some basic code. I'm going to let you guys do the rest of this, and I think a lot of those other requirements on the PDF should look relatively familiar. We've talked about the title. We just did an H1. Of course, we've done a paragraph. But you can use these H1s to your advantage, or these header tags. And I've included an H1, H2, and H3. I typically don't use anything beyond an H3, but you use that to create hierarchy within your document. So an H1 would be the title of your page. So for example, Matthew Bollinger's CV or resume. And then you would use H2s and H3s to establish other sections of your document. So for example, exhibitions, teaching experience, projects, skills, expertise, what else? Education. And then sometimes those have further drop downs like H3. And I don't need to explain unordered and ordered lists to you or even links. So all that information is available to you. So yeah, that's the basics refresher to kind of get you going with this semester, especially if you haven't had a class with me for a while. This is the kind of information that you don't forget, but you constantly need to sort of brush up on. Otherwise, you can get rusty really, really quickly. So I look forward to seeing your CV resume document that is focused on being an artist or a designer in a professional context. Thanks, guys. Bye.